Hello, everyone. Welcome to Humanity Rising. As we come to the 13th day of the U.S.-Israeli attack and assault on Iran. And so we're going to spend today, uh, first of all, just providing everybody an update of what is happening as we know it. And secondly, then we'll provide some commentary and some analysis of where we believe the war is headed. The most important thing to begin with is that with all the conflicting explanations and the he said, she said by the Secretary of State and the Secretary of War and Donald Trump himself and Benjamin Netanyahu and all their national security experts that have been on the news, it seems to have been a mass confusion, which it has at one level. But it's very important for all of us to understand there was only one goal to this exercise, whatever the explanations that came out afterward. And that one goal has been regime change. This is why they did it. And this is what they sought to achieve. And because they believe their own rhetoric, their own propaganda, their own intelligence reports, they believe that the decapitation strike against the supreme leader and roughly 75 of the senior leadership that had gathered in his home and adjacent buildings as part of the governmental complex there in Qom, the holy city of the Shia in Islam in Iran. The Israelis and the Americans assumed that that decapitation strike was going to ignite a revolution in Iran because they had convinced themselves that everybody hated the clerics, everybody hated the mullahs. And so they expected a short war. And then they would bring in support for the rising thousands and millions that were going to then overthrow the regime. And then the plan was to bring in the son of the Shah and other Israeli assets, CIA assets into Iran and establish a pro-American, pro-Israeli regime. That's what they had with the father of the Shah. And just to recall people's memory from what I said last week, to understand everything that's going on, it was the CIA and MI6, the American and British intelligence, that overthrew Mossadegh in Iran in 1953 because he wanted Iran to own Iranian oil, which he was perfectly happy to sell to the British. And the British not only wanted all the oil, they wanted to own the oil, and they didn't want to give Iran hardly any of the royalties at all. And because he opposed that, they overthrew him and they brought in the Shah. And the Shah exercised from 1953 to 1979, over 25 years, a tyrannical, authoritarian regime backed up by the CIA and MI6 and Mossad uh, in a terror regime organized by Savak, their secret police. Finally, the Iranian people revolted under the leadership of the Ayatollah Khomeini. And after that revolution, another form of tyranny was enforced in Iran, this time by the clerics, not the CIA and Mossad. But the Iranian regime completely reversed the pro-US and pro-Israel policies of the Shah and began a policy formation of supporting oppressed people, whether they were in Palestine, whether they were the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they began to mobilize an international campaign to oppose the spread of Zionism and Israeli power in the Middle East. And they became really the only country in the world that was actively opposing the United States and Israeli designs in the expansion of Israel and in the destabilization of the Middle East. And that's why Benjamin Netanyahu, knowing this, has had a singular focus for over 40 years in overthrowing the regime in Iran. They believed that after the attack last June, the 12-day war, where they tried to decimate Iran's nuclear capacities, that this next stage of decapitating the Ayatollah would suffice to ignite this revolution. So that's the most important strategic reality that we all need to take in. And it didn't work. Big time. So if you had to condense everything that's going on right now in the Middle East, is that the plan was tactically, exquisitely executed. They blew up everybody around the Ayatollah. But no revolt happened. Instead, thousands of Iranian people came out to mourn the passing of Khamenei, an 86-year-old man. And the Iranians immediately shut the Straits of Hormuz, launched devastating attacks on US bases, both military and intelligence, around the Persian Gulf and the Middle East, and began to rain fire down on Israel through missile and drone attacks. Apparently, neither the Israelis nor the Americans, in their calculations about regime change, ever expected the Iranians to shut the Straits of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil flows every day, about 20 million barrels a day. Apparently, it was casually discussed and then dismissed because they didn't believe that the Iranians would ever really do it. So all the consternation that we are seeing in the news emanates from the single truth that the decapitation of the Ayatollah was a tactical success and a complete strategic disaster. And I'd like to just unpack that so that we get a sense of the reverberative effects of what is now unfolding in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, and around the world. Let's begin with oil. That's what the Persian Gulf produces, oil and gas. One of the first casualties of the Iranian attacks was the liquid natural gas plant in Qatar, which produces 25% of all the world's LNG. So that's gone. The 20 million barrels a day are gone. Japan has a need for oil, 75% of which comes from the Persian Gulf. In South Korea, it's over 50%. In India, it's 40%. In Europe, it's 20%. So just imagine what's happening in Tokyo, in Seoul, in New Delhi, as they confront the stark reality that there's no more oil coming. And even if the Straits of Hormuz were opened today, it would take weeks at a minimum for any kind of oil to flow, probably months, because the Iranians have destroyed much of the infrastructure. Today in Los Angeles, California, gas is being sold at $8 a gallon. And gas prices are escalating all over the United States and all over the world. It's an extraordinary situation. The International Oil Producing Association has said that this is the worst oil-related catastrophe in history. Yesterday, the United States and Europe opened their strategic oil reserves, both of which in the United States and Europe were not full because President Trump didn't bother to fill up the reserves after President Biden left office, even though he promised that he would, which gives the world maybe 2 or 3 weeks of oil left. That's what we're now in. This is a disaster in slow motion now because we haven't quite felt the impact. But over the next week, 10 days, 2 or 3 weeks, and month, with the Straits of Hormuz shut down, the world is going to go into a spasm that could potentially unravel the entire global economy because the world runs on oil. That's just what's true. Militarily, it's equally disastrous, especially for the Americans and the Israelis, because they didn't expect an attack. They weren't defending against it. And the Iranians came in and within very short order, a few days, completely knocked out the U.S. surveillance systems. And so the vaunted Iron Dome of Israel was compromised from the very start. The very start. In the June 12th 12-day war last year, the Israelis were able to give their citizens 10, sometimes 12 minutes warning because of the early warning systems the United States had on the Persian Gulf. Those are gone. Day before yesterday in Kiryat Shmona in northern Israel, where I've been when I was at the University of Tel Aviv studying Middle Eastern studies as a college student, I stayed on the kibbutz. It was attacked by Hezbollah without any warning at all. And apparently in Tel Aviv and other cities they're beginning to get maybe 60-second warnings, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. as the Israeli system begins to fail. And the Iranians haven't even used their biggest missiles, their biggest drones. Those are all safely buried in deep underground caves and caverns where most of their military hardware is. They've been preparing for this for decades. And as Arakshi said in his NBC interview last week, when he was asked, what if the U.S. invades and puts boots on the ground, which I'll get to in a little bit, he said, we're waiting for you. We're waiting for you. So while the United States and Israel are in a consternation, what to do, the Iranians are implementing a strategic plan that has been developed over decades. Another factor, which is what you see in Lebanon, another surprise, the Israelis thought that they had decimated Hezbollah. And now Hezbollah is hitting them, northern Israel, with barrages of rockets and drones and missiles that are shocking the Israelis. Where did they get all this weaponry? We thought we destroyed them. That's what happens when you drink your own Kool-Aid, when you believe your own promotion, your own propaganda. And simultaneously, the Shia in Iraq are activating. They just shot down a U.S. aircraft and 4 service people were killed. Why? Because when the Israelis and the Americans killed the Ayatollah, they killed a supreme leader of Shia Islam. And the other major clerics of Shia Islam, particularly the Grand Mufti of Baghdad, launched a fatwa, holy war, against the United States and Israel. So Shia Muslims began to rise up in Pakistan, where they attacked the U.S. embassy. They've been attacking all the U.S. bases in Iraq. There are many Shia Muslims in Europe and in the United States. What are they going to do? Because they now have a direct order from the supreme leadership, like the Pope to the Catholics, telling them to engage in holy war against the Americans and the Israelis. It's an extraordinary thing to take in the colossal disaster that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu have brought us into in less than the last 2 weeks. And what I've described isn't the totality. You have the reality that the United States and Israel have been, essentially bombing Iran. They've released that the United States has launched over 6,000 attacks, the Israelis over 7,500. They've been bombing Iran like the Israelis have been bombing Gaza indiscriminately. We all have heard about the 160, 70 young girls, most of which were under 10 years old, that were incinerated on the first day of the war. that has been acknowledged now by the Pentagon, by the U.S. Department of Defense, that it was a U.S. Tomahawk missile that did that. But the Israelis have been indiscriminately killing civilians across the length and breadth of Iran. Apparently, over 17,000 homes have been blown up with the people in them, just like the Israelis have been doing in Gaza. Which leads me to the final thing that I want to provide as an update, and that is who the Iranians have chosen to be their new supreme leader, their new Ayatollah. And that is Ali Khamenei's son, Mojtaba, 56 years old, who was at his father's side for many, many years as his advisor and confidant and aide. So he has been integrated systematically into the Iranian governmental and religious structures. He was in the room with his father when the Israelis and the Americans attacked on the 28th of February. And when the dust lifted, he survived. Apparently, he had lacerations and damage to his legs. But his father was killed. His mother was killed. His wife was killed. A daughter was killed. And several siblings were killed because they blew up the home and the whole compound. So I want everybody to just pause for a moment and take this in. The new leader of Iran, personally injured, just lost most of the people he loved and were important to him. And he's now making final decisions as to how Iran is going to comport itself as the war unfolds. And completely unsurprisingly, in his first statement, he said the Straits of Hormuz are going to stay closed. So not only have we unleashed a whirlwind on the oil markets and the financial markets and gas prices, and the Shia Muslims now unleashed to engage in holy war against the Americans and the Israelis. And the Israelis are no longer adequately able to warn their own citizens, and the U.S. bases are out of commission, and the Saudis and the Qataris and the Bahrainis and the UAE are all in a state of paroxysms of confusion and concern, knowing that no oil going out means there's no food coming in to the Emirates. And most of them had less than 7-8 days supply. And most of the airports are still closed. And the new leader, just imagine what's going on in his psyche. For a start, he has post-traumatic stress syndrome. You cannot go through that kind of experience of trauma and not have it reverberate through your entire system. And then when you pick yourself up that they've killed both your parents and your wife and your daughter and your brothers and sisters, and you are now the supreme leader, Just imagine what's going through his mind. Added to which, both the Israelis and President Trump and Hegseth have said, we're going to kill him too. The Israelis said they were going to kill the new supreme leader even before they knew who it was. And that brings me to a very important part of the analysis that we need to now spend some time contemplating. It was in 1996 that a think tank in Washington, a Zionist think tank, articulated a doctrine called clean break, in which they asserted that the most important thing for Israel to do in the future was to eliminate any nation that was actively supporting Palestinian resistance, because it was imperative that the Israelis destroy any possibility of a two-state solution, which they've opposed since it was passed by the United Nations in the 1940s and has been reiterated by the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly and by the United States up to Trump repeatedly. The world has said the only way for peace in the Middle East is a two-state solution. And the way to oppose it was to really destroy the 7 nations in the immediate area that were actively supporting the Palestinians. And that included Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, Somalia and Sudan and North Africa, and Iran. I've spoken about this before. This has been the policy formation of Benjamin Netanyahu, who came to the prime ministership in Israel in 1996. Clean break, like Project 2025 for Donald Trump in his second term, is the blueprint and has been the blueprint for the last 30 years for the man who's basically been the leader of Israel for the last 30 years. He's worked tirelessly because the goal of the Israelis, the goal of Zionism going back 100 years, is to establish greater Israel. The borders that we see today from the Israeli point of view are completely arbitrary, ad hoc, and fungible. Their goal, which has been articulated for many, many decades, going back to the 1970s when I was there. I did my junior year abroad at the University of Tel Aviv. And I can still remember, I was shocked at the time, and I'm shocked even today. They put up big maps showing that Israel, over time, was going to expand into Lebanon. That's why they're pounding southern Lebanon and have been for the last 30 years. Move into Syria and take much of Syria. Possibly go up into Turkey. Take much of Jordan, because right now Israel and Jordan share the Jordan River as a boundary, and Israel wants to control everything from the Dead Sea all the way up, and then go into Egypt in fulfillment of this promise, apparently, that God made to Abraham back in the book of Genesis in 1600 BC, when Abraham is said to have lived. That God was going to give his descendants all the land between the Euphrates River, which is now in Iraq, and the Nile River, which is in Egypt. So for the last 30 years, what the Israelis have been doing is destabilizing, attacking, creating chaos, creating divisiveness, so that dysfunctional, failed states would populate the Middle East, particularly those states that supported Palestinian statehood, and Israel would expand out as the chaos ensued. So what this attack and decapitation attempt on the part of Israel means for Netanyahu, this to him is Armageddon. This to him is the final battle. This to him is the objective for which he has lusted and manipulated the American foreign policy establishment and political system for the last 30 years. This is what the ultimate goal was, to cut off the head of the snake. And one of the things he's been doing while the war has been taking place are a number of false flag operations. There was an attack on Azerbaijan, but it turned out that the missiles came from Georgia and had been secreted in by Mossad and the CIA. They threw the missiles, and then all of a sudden the Azerbaijanis were told this came from Iran, but they hadn't. They'd been launched by Israel. Israel got busy even while the Iranians were attacking US bases to blow up some of their own in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, to sow as much confusion as absolutely possible. And in fact, several Mossad agents were arrested by the Qataris as they were planning to blow up US and civilian installations in Qatar to, again, sow as much confusion as they can. I raise this. Why? Because the Israelis may be calculating that a nice, clean, false flag operation in a city in middle America where they blow up a bunch of people and blame it on the Iranians is exactly what the United States and Donald Trump needs to stay in the war. Because right now, Donald Trump is a very confused man. Everything that the Israelis told him was true has turned out to be false. And he's looking at the abyss of unmitigated disaster in the midterms, because this attack on Iran has the singular distinction of being the most unpopular war at its beginning with the public in all of US history. There has never, ever been a war that at the beginning was only supported by about 20% of the American electorate. So the confusion in his MAGA base, the confusion in the Republican Party, even the confusion that's beginning to manifest on Fox News is an open book for Donald Trump, that he's got to find an off-ramp any way he can. And the Israelis, Benjamin Netanyahu, are determined to eliminate any off-ramp, because what they need is war. And I think that is the subject to which we now need to turn. John Mersheimer said yesterday on one of the podcasts something that I think is very important for us to take in. John Mersheimer is the Dean of International Relations Studies at the University of Chicago. He's written many, many books on foreign policy. He's what they call an international relations realist. He is a very hard-nosed, trained at West Point, and he has said that the tragedy of this debacle is that Donald Trump is now caught in an escalation ladder that is being actively instigated by the Israelis, reinforced by the Iranians, who are not backing down and are not agreeing to a ceasefire and are keeping the Straits of Hormuz closed. So what does Donald Trump do? What are his options? The option that is being discussed and encouraged as much as the Israelis can is the option of boots on the ground. And there's discussions of the attack on the island of Karg, where the Iranians have many of their oil refineries and oil-related manufacturing institutions and shipping and so forth and so on. Why don't we just go attack the Karg Island? And there's rumors that the 82nd Airborne Brigade, this crack strike force of the U.S. Army, will be sent in to seize Karg Island and begin landing, Eisenhower landing on Normandy, establish a beachhead, and then with the Kurds and with the Azerbaijanis and with anybody else we could get, we're going to go in and we're going to really, really, really have regime change. That's what's being fomented. And I would dare say even Donald Trump knows that this is going to be a disaster. But he's so surrounded by Zionist diehards like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and his Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth and Tim Waltz and Bassett at Treasury. I mean, he is surrounded by hardcore Zionists for whom the interests of Israel are more important than the interests of the United States. That's the simplest way to put it. And because Israel needs complete chaos in the Middle East so it can expand, the United States is being drawn into something that is unprecedented in the entire history of the world, as far as we know from recorded history, as John Mersheimer points out, and others. There's no other example in history where a small nation has so effectively taken over a big nation and directs its presidential, national, and foreign policy as Israel has done with the United States. It's extraordinary when you understand how Israel controls U.S. interests, even to bring the United States into the brink of boots on the ground. And when we're talking boots on the ground in Iran, we're not talking boots on the ground in Gaza. where the U.S. is already beginning to deploy troops. We're not talking boots on the ground in Iraq or even Afghanistan. We're talking boots on the ground of a country of nearly 100 million people, the size of all of Western Europe, that are completely unified, like the Vietnamese were, against the Imperium. And that's why I mentioned Mojtaba Khamenei and what he's been through. And he's now the leader, boy. He's now the leader. And the Israelis are manipulating and inciting and doing everything they can to get the ground war going. Because you have Israel, United States attacking Iran, Israel can go all over. For Israel, the United States is not an ally. For Israel, the United States is an asset to be manipulated to further designs of Zionism to create greater Israel. That's the bottom line. Which leads me to the nuclear option. You'll be noting in the press, just like there's all kinds of discussion around boots on the ground, there is more and more discussion about the use of nuclear weapons. Both in the Senate, in the media, in the White House, in Europe. And so you know perfectly well that this discussion is being seeded into the public consciousness so that when it comes, everyone will know that it was an option all along, and let's just get on with it. I don't have hard evidence, but I know as surely as the sun is shining today that Israel and the United States are contemplating the nuclear option against Iran. And that should all terrify us to the marrow of our bones. Because they are now in panic. The Iranians, rather than being decapitated and the revolution ensuing, are defeating the United States strategically, politically, and militarily. The Gulf states have been neutralized. The oil-consuming states are in panic. And so boots on the ground and the possibility of a nuclear weapons utilization are emerging in the councils of governance in Israel and the United States as viable options, while they continue to bomb Iran like the Israelis have been bombing Gaza. So this is not a pretty picture, what's going on, my dear friends. One of the realities in me bringing this information to you is the effectiveness with which the Israelis have shut down any information coming out of Israel about the damage that's being done by the Iranians. And as I understand it, you can be arrested and put in jail for 5 years if you even take photos of the damage, and greater penalties if you post them on social media. The Gulf states have begun to do the same thing. So you sort of hear of Iranian attacks, but you don't see very much. So it's easy for us to think, oh, not much is really happening because I'm not seeing it in the news. You got to look really hard in little nooks and crannies to find out what's really happening, which I discipline myself to do. So I'm reporting to you what I've been gleaning from a variety of news sources that are still operating and sharing with you as part of the Humanity Rising community what it is that we are dealing with, which leads me to the final aspect that we have to always keep in mind. Remember, this is a global conflagration. So there's political levels, military levels, strategic levels, economic levels, financial levels, cultural levels. And that is that the third temple is coming up like boots on the ground. And the nuclear attack for tracking YouTube, there's all this third temple discussion going on. I mentioned last week that for the evangelical Christians and the extremist Zionists in Israel, we are at the end of time. We're at the time of apocalypse. I was the son of a missionary, I told you. And when I was a little boy, my dad told us, he was a missionary, a Baptist missionary, that when the Jews came back and set up the state of Israel in 1948, that was the beginning of the end of time. And Jesus is coming any moment. And one of the aspects indicated by some of these prophecies that they stitch together is that there will be a new temple, the third temple. The first temple was the one that Solomon built about 900 BC. That was destroyed. And then the second by the Babylonians and the Assyrians. And then in the 5th century, when the Jews came back from their Babylonian exile, the Persians helped them build the second temple. And that was destroyed by the Romans. Right when the Jews were expelled from Palestine by the Romans and began the last 2,000 years of diaspora. So there's been this apocalyptic vision at the end of it all. We're going to get that temple back. Problem was that when the Muslims came in the 7th century AD and conquered the area, they built the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And because they believed that Muhammad ascended into heaven in his vision when he went to the 7th heaven from Mount Moriah. That's what it's called, Mount Moriah. It's the third holiest site of Islam. So you destroy that mosque, and you've incited 1.2 billion Muslims all over the world. Mount Moriah is the site of where Adam was supposed to have been created, where Abraham offered Isaac, where Solomon built his first temple. It's, the Wailing Wall. It's the Holy of Holies for the Jews, for the Christians, for the Muslims. There's even a discussion among an Israeli politician that why don't we do a false flag on the Al-Aqsa Mosque and blame it on the Iranians? That's been circulating in social media. If you listen to some of these evangelical Christian preachers that are preaching, support Iran, they are the infidel, they are the Gog and Magog, and we're coming close. Jesus is coming any moment. We just got to got to blow up that temple so that we can get the third temple. There's social media clips of Pete Hegseth, who is now Secretary of War under Donald Trump, talking about building the third temple. These guys aren't kidding. And the Israelis have now closed off Al-Aqsa Mosque over the last couple of days to everybody. They shut it off from Palestinians as soon as their attack started 2 weeks ago. And now they've shut it down. I raise this because what we're dealing with is a hologram now, where everything is reinforcing everything else and nobody's in control. And the whole thing is spinning out of control. In this maelstrom, I would urge all of us to do a couple of things. Number one, pay attention to the news. And I would say if you want the most concise, easily digestible, go to Judging Freedom by Judge Neapolitano. And every day he's bringing on John Mersheimer, Max Blumenthal, Larry Wilkerson, Larry Johnson, who've been on Humanity Rising, Jeffrey Sachs. And if you want to track what's going on, if I had to give you one show to watch, look up Judging Freedom. He's one of the few honest brokers, doubly so because he's a conservative. But he sees reality pretty much like it's taking place and provides really good news. But anything from Jeffrey Sachs, anything from Alexander Mercouris, anything from Max Blumenthal, anything from John Mersheimer, Larry Wilkerson, he's very good. Larry Johnson, he's very good, is what you should be watching so you stay informed. You actually know what's going on. It's the truth that sets us free. And secondly, I would say, whatever you're doing to create internal equilibrium, double it. This is a time when the centrifugal forces of events can blow us asunder and we can lose our center. So we need to be deepening our practice. Deepening our practice. Meditating more. Engaging in random acts of kindness. Being more creatively artistic. Whatever it is that gives you a sense of solace. With your cat, with your dog, with your kids, with your community. This is a time for deepening coherence internally and in your community. However it is that you do that. It's an extraordinary and important thing to do. And thirdly, I would urge all of us to talk about this, to take a stand against this war in every way that you can. And it's worth noting that in the Iraqi war, the US government went to the UN, went to the Gulf states, created this huge coalition, major propaganda around weapons of mass destruction, and got 70% of the American people to support the invasion of Iraq. Remember shock and awe? We all watched it on CNN. The Iran war has been completely the opposite. The Trump administration didn't go to the UN at all. There was no consultation with anybody other than the Israelis. There was very little about it even in the news, unless you were kind of watching. And even then, it was the most unpopular war in American history. And that's strategically important, everybody. We need to get out on the streets. We need to be organizing protest. We need to be telling people this should not be happening. Because Donald Trump, as confused and as criminal and as pornographic as that man is, and it's hard to understate the magnitude of his delusions and criminality and pornographic behavior, is acutely aware of the polls. And more people are telling him he's going off the cliff. Because the most important thing that Donald Trump could do right now, in my view, is declare victory and walk away. Because if he doesn't, we're going to end up with boots on the ground and or the use of nuclear weapons, fomented by the Israelis, who want chaos for the sake of greater Israel. And somehow we've got to get to the President of the United States that he does not want that to happen to the United States. It's a long shot, because Trump has been completely captured by Netanyahu. We all know that. But there may be something in his mind yet completely undecided, that if we're aware, we stay strong, and we speak truth to power, like I'm doing right now, we may be able to get the United States to step back from the abyss. Because if it goes into the abyss, we all go with him. That's what global war means. And that's the situation in which we find ourselves on the 13th of March, 2026. So thank you, everyone. I'll be glad to join the after chat for a little bit. And I hope that you'll send this video out to as many people as you possibly can, because never before in my lifetime has so much been at stake and so much demanded of each and every one of us as this moment in our world, in our time. So thank you, everyone. God bless you. I love all of you. I'm headed now on Sunday with my good friend Tom Eddington to Colombia for a consultation, a 5-day ceremony with the Kogi elders. They're coming from all over the Torona people. There'll be apparently upwards of 50 of them. And I'll do a recording for next week, and then I'll be back the following week on the 27th of March for a live broadcast from Washington, D.C. And we'll have updates of the world at that time. Thank you, everyone. See you in the after chat. Bye for now.